I hate the partisan, like super partisan commentators. They annoy the shit out of me.
Yes,
the people
me too.
who say the thing that they think they're supposed to say. God, I hate that so much. It just drives me crazy. It's like, you don't even know what you really think on this. You're just like saying the thing you think you're supposed to say. And I cannot respect that at all. I'm just a YouTuber. You're just a YouTuber. Like, fucking relax. Jesus Christ. And it's everywhere, man.
He's
but
talking about David Pakman, guys. That's what that's what he means when he says that.
David, I'm not, man. I'm not David. Dude, just honesty. Like, that's the space it needs to be. Just, what do you actually think about the fucking issue, and talk about it?
I don't care what anyone says. No one could ever speak ill of Kyle Kulinski now for any reason. Because,
yeah, exactly.
He said that we're based in line centrist. That's how easily I've been bought off.
Hey, let's welcome Kyle Kulinski to the stream. What's up, Kyle? Thanks for joining us.
Hey guys, my pleasure. Don't let me interrupt the train of thought.
Things are getting spicy here.
Kyle, pleased to meet you. I really enjoyed. You had a really great conversation with Glenn Greenwald a few years ago that I've really enjoyed a lot. Thanks for having that.
Thank you. No, thank you.
It was. It ended up talking about, I guess, white supremacy and it was just, I think he was talking about his work when he was a lawyer defending neo-Nazis and stuff like that, and why he was doing that.
Was it the one I'm not sure if I've spoken to him on my channel since like 2015-ish. Was it like, the topic of the conversation Sam Harris, and then it like branched off?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Those guys hated each other. I don't know if they hate each other as much anymore, but like they despised each other.
Really? Why did they hate each other?
Glenn's sort of got off a cliff, hasn't he, with his
Dude, so to answer your question, why did they hate each other? It's actually, it's really interesting because, so I came up in politics and I was reading like Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion, and I was part of like the new atheist thing. But then also at the same time, I was a lefty because I read Chomsky and stuff. And so in my world, like lefty politics and like, anti-theist stuff sort of was married at the hip. And then you had Sam Harris, who represents like anti-theism and atheism, and you had Glenn, who at the time represented like really strong left politics. He viewed Chomsky as like, one of his idols. And so they would butt heads over this issue of basically Muslims and Islam and Al-Qaeda. And Glenn Greenwald would accuse Sam Harris of being like a bigot and an Islamophobe, and Sam Harris would be like, I'm not a bigot or an Islamophobe, like I'm just against like whatever extremist Muslims. And then they were talking past each other for like 3 years straight, where they despised each other. Those guys didn't say a single kind word to each other the entire time. And then what's really funny is that Joe Rogan was really close with Sam Harris a while back. And then I actually, like whatever it was, a year and a half ago, 2 years ago or whatever, I'm the one who hooked up Glenn and Joe Rogan, where they had a podcast together. And now I haven't seen Sam Harris talk to Rogan since then, but like there literally may have been like a Mean Girl situation where they like, now Sam Harris and Joe aren't friends because Joe is actually kind of friendly with Glenn Greenwald now. Wow. Yeah. Isn't that crazy?
Well, I think Sam was very put off by Joe being skeptical on a lot of the COVID stuff.
Oh,
too.
Yes. Yeah.
100%. Yeah. In fact, he in his podcast, he took like pot shots, not just at Joe, but also at like
Brett,
one of the Weinsteins. I don't remember which one it is, who was doing the whole ivermectin stuff and leaning into that. But like, you could tell that Sam was not having that.
Right.
Hey,
wasn't Glenn came out? He was mad at Sam when on Bill Maher, when he had that interaction with Ben Affleck.
Yep. Yeah. Glenn was totally, he was way more in the Ben Affleck camp than he was in the Maher Harris camp.
Well, you kind of said something interesting, Christian, which is, do you perceive Glenn Greenwald as being right wing now?
Did I say that?
Well, you said you seem like he's gone off the deep end.
He has. I think he has. Yeah, he's kind of reflexively punching left these days, I think.
Well, why do you think that is, though?
Oh God, I can't remember, because I kind of, after about 2 or 3 sort of experiences of him doing that, just for me, I mean, who cares what I think? I just thought, I'm not,
Well, okay, well, why do you?
So I haven't actually, sort of for like, I'd have to say 6 months really engaged with anything that he's done.
So Glenn, I like have a real personal affinity for Glenn because I know him privately, and like we've had nothing but wonderful interactions, and he's a really, really sweet guy, and he's like fiercely loyal. So in a sense, I feel fiercely loyal to him as well. In terms of his politics very publicly now, his main theme,
he has a persona that I suspect is different to what he's actually like.
Well, his main theme, the crux of most of his arguments these days is just like, aren't liberals really stupid? You know what I mean? Yeah. Like it's almost everything he focuses on, which, you know, if that's your cup of tea, by all means, but certainly his focus is more that than it has ever been previously. I think that's kind of undeniable.
Well, my big sticking point with Glenn is that he does this thing that really bothers me, where he keeps throwing wokeness as like a liberal problem, and he's denying that wokeness arose, even though like there's a lot of liberals that are definitely using wokeness to virtue signal, but he's denying, it seems like, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, that wokeness really came from a far more leftist academic theory and thought process, and it's not really fair to blame liberals for wokeness now.
Yeah, I think so. More recently, he's changed his terminology to blame liberal-leftists. So he like throws both of them in there when it comes to criticizing them for wokeness. But to your point, I do think he used to do that, where it would just be the word liberal. But I don't know. He even says he doesn't really categorize himself as a leftist anymore, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah, because he gets dogpiled all the time for stuff he says, where like lefty Twitter will go after him sort of ruthlessly, and that further turns him off to lefties. And so the only label that he truly accepts across the board is civil libertarian. That's the one that I've heard him like embrace wholeheartedly, because he was big with like the ACLU, and you know that's his flavor of politics that he self-identifies as.
It's interesting, and it's actually kind of sad that we define ourselves by who's attacking us, because it's like, oh, you know, if his politics hasn't really changed at all, but he's just getting attacked from the left because he's attacking, you know, liberals and people on the left. So suddenly he's like, well, I guess I'm not on the left anymore. It's like, but maybe you still are on the left.
Right. Yeah, that's such a great point. And I feel like you're the only person who I've ever heard make that point, because so many people, no, seriously, they get their brains broken by like social media. And they just start defining themselves as like, I'm against this. And it's like, well, if you actually just think through the issues and go point for point, that actually is your definition of what label fits you. It's not like, I don't like these people. That's not good enough grounding for that.
Well, it just seems to me that so much of politics isn't people have principles and then they try to figure out what they believe. It's just figuring out what team I'm on. And I think that's a very innate, humans kind of evolved to be in this camp. I think that's why you have kind of like the Dave Rubin situations where, people get attacked, or even the Candace Owens situations where people get attacked by one side and they're like, oh, I guess I'm not on this team anymore because I'm getting attacked by these people. So now I'm going to just completely switch to this other team. And it's like, well, that doesn't really make sense from a principled level, but I don't think people look at politics on a principled sense.
With Glenn Greenwald, though, what came first? Because he just kind of made a habit of going on Tucker Carlson, didn't he? Do you know what I mean? It's like, and obviously Tucker is booking him because he's going, yeah, liberals are stupid. And it's like, it's just a circle jerk, isn't it? Really, it's hard to respect him, really.
So I'm one of the few lefties who will like openly argue that you should engage everywhere. And I
are you
stand
going
by
on
that.
Tucker soon? Kyle?
No, I've never
Will we
been
see
invited.
you on Tucker? If he invited you, it sounds like you would go, though.
Well, it honestly depends, because that was the second part of the point that I was going to get to, which is, it's okay to go on there and find some common ground when there actually is common ground. But also, I mean, just for clarity's sake, you'd almost like to, for the record, be like, but here's this other thing that I really like disagree with you on. So I'm not just coming. I don't want to be the lefty who goes on right platforms to only bash other lefties, because then you know what I'm saying? Like,
of course not.
But again, I'm fine with agreeing where we agree, but also just for clarity's sake to state, like, I'm not with you on this, and this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but that's not what happens on Tucker Carlson.
Agreed.
And so, and knowing that, and it's not just some new show that's come out of nowhere and nobody knows what it is. We know what it is, right? And when he books you to go on there, not you personally, one knows when one gets booked to go on Tucker Carlson, you are a prop. right?
Well, that's one narrative, but I don't necessarily know that it's accurate.
has a worldview, or the people that put the show together, including him, have a worldview, and it's basically let's get people on that fit that worldview. So if we get a leftist on, or our house leftist, they better be a leftist that's bashing leftists.
That's so bad. That's so bad, Christian. That's so terrible.
What?
So what's
because you're casting all of Tucker Carlson as just propaganda, and
I mean, that is true,
well, it is.
I don't know.
It is.
So
Adam, you're making it very hard for me to respect your intelligence right now.
Now he's coming after me.
I'm exerting myself, right? So Tucker Carlson is not propaganda.
Well, no, I don't. Tucker Carlson is accused of a lot of things that I just like. Yes, it's nebulous. It can be seen either way, but I haven't seen him do. Like a lot of the clips that go around are Tucker Carlson endorses the Great Replacement theory and shit like that. I don't know if that's true.
There was one time when he got caught off guard, which was that Scandinavian guy who used his phone and tape recorded, his end of the conversation because he got cut from the show. Mm-hmm. And basically this guy, I forgot his name, but maybe you guys will remember it.
The economics guy. I don't remember his name.
Yeah, he basically said, this trope, which I happen to think there's some truth in, that TV news or whatever is millionaires being paid by billionaires to blame the poor, and Tucker was taking issue with that. I mean, I check out the clip, but basically Tucker really loses it with him because he goes, well, you're a millionaire, right? And this is the structure of the show. And that was the one time where it actually entered the record because this guy surreptitiously taped it on his end, but it got cut from the show, and he couldn't stand being confronted by the actual reality of what he's making and what he's doing.
Well, I don't want to turn the show into a conversation about Tucker Carlson just because I don't watch Tucker Carlson. I don't know a lot about Tucker Carlson. I see clips going around. I see people calling Tucker Carlson names and stuff like that. But
maybe the clips are the point.
I just don't know enough about it to have an intelligent conversation about it.
I think the thing with Glenn Tucker is that, Glenn is very anti-establishment.
Right.
And I do think he sees common cause with, I think a lot of populist left see, common cause with populist right-wingers on that level. And I think that's why
they're both populist.
That's Fox, isn't it? Home of the anti-establishment. Go on, Fox.
Well, that's what's interesting about Tucker, that he's trying to appeal to that audience.
Yes, I actually think he's more sophisticated than he's given credit for. I think a lot of the populism is really functionally faux populism because he redirects that energy to support like standard establishment Republicans. But in terms of appealing beyond just like the Sean Hannity fans, I think he has the ability to sort of, pull from some independents and some more moderate people. And he's the first kind of like in the mold of 2016 version of Trump style host. You know what I mean? It's not standard Mitt Romney Republicanism. It's like, it's a new sort of faux populist Trump type thing. And I think that's probably one of the main reasons why he's gotten such a big audience. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think that a lot of it really is just posturing, because if you end up supporting the same politicians that are part of that wing of the Republican Party that is the same as the Mitt Romneys and the Mitch McConnells, then it's just like, it all comes to naught,
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Christian, I think I'm going to say goodbye just because we wanted to, we had planned on leaving a bit earlier, but do you want to pitch anything before you take off?
No, I just, apologies in advance if I've been too political.
No. This is a political show.
Listen, Christian,
in terms of
I definitely want to have you back because we love arguing about this stuff, and you seem to be arguing in good faith, even though we probably disagree on a lot of things. But that's okay.
That's a really happy outcome for me because I am saying these things in good faith, and and the times where my blood pressure goes up is when good faith is assumed on the other side, when we've had so many examples of reasons to not assume it. For instance, in the case of Tucker Carlson, I mean, just the few.
Well,
it's not been so many hours that this
we'll
mass
argue.
shooting
We'll
was
plan
inspired by his screeds. So,
we'll plan an entire hour of how bad faith Tucker Carlson is next time.
I know I can't do the emotional labor to watch it, but I will. But all I want to say is, like, whether I come across like a left-wing demagogue or not, or not political enough. The government does only spend one way when it spends. Please bring your skepticism and investigate that if you would like. That I'm happy for you to do that. And when you discover how that whole system works, some implications follow from that. And to me, that's where modern monetary theory is at. And that's why it's important. So I don't want to missell it.
We'll continue talking about it as well. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Christian.
Okay.
We'll see you next time. And I did put a link to your podcast in the description, so check it out.
Thanks, Adam.
Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you, Carl. And Sitch. And Adam.
It wasn't nice meeting Adam.
Right. Do I need to press anything now?
You press the little leave button.
Okay. All right. Cheers, guys.
Take care.
See ya. So there's an interesting thing, Kyle. I saw your video. I think it was recently. You had one where you were watching it was like an anti-DeSantis ad.
Yes, it was a More Perfect Union video on where they're spending Florida tax money and whatnot.
Right, and the ad was sort of saying like, Ron DeSantis is pretending to be kind of like a man of the people, a populist, but if you look at his record, he's really just like every other, Bush, Reagan era neocon, neoliberal Republican who just wants to help big corporations, blah, blah, blah. And that all might be true. And this is sort of where I'm coming from, is it seems to me that the Democrats have really screwed themselves here, because the Republicans are in this weird spot where most Republicans are not populists. They are still Bush, Reagan era neocon, neoliberals. But they want to appeal to this kind of populist movement that kind of fermented under Trump and the Tea Party. And so the Democrats kind of wading into the woke culture war issues has given the Republicans this the perfect out to just not talk about or not really focus on economic issues, and to just go so whole hog on culture war issues that they can get all the right-wing populists behind them. So with DeSantis, it doesn't really matter whether he's really an economic populist or not.
I could not agree more. In fact, I've been beating that drum for a long time. I mean, you saw this in Virginia with Terry McAuliffe versus Glenn Youngkin, right, where McAuliffe followed Youngkin right down the culture war rabbit hole and got destroyed. And McAuliffe basically ran on like, "Hey guys, Trump's really, really bad. Did you know that? He's so bad." And it's like, okay, well, that worked barely for Joe Biden in 2020, but yeah, that's got a time limit on it, man. And when Democrats don't focus on the area where they're more popular, they're going to get destroyed. And, the DeSantis segment was cathartic for me, because it's you hear all this chatter around DeSantis and all these attacks against DeSantis from Democrats, but they're so impotent, and his approval rating remains high, and he's clearly number 2 behind Donald Trump. And it's well, if you guys sort of focused on these sorts of things, then that wouldn't be the case, but they don't do it. So, that segment from More Perfect Union I thought was phenomenal. And I just wanted to share that with my audience.
I agree, theoretically. I don't think it is persuasive. I don't think Republicans care. I don't think most
about
people
the corruption
really,
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I think most voters are not, I think they talk about economic stuff and they care. I mean, people care about inflation, obviously, because it's so in their face. But I think people are more emotionally drawn to these culture war social issues because they're sort of easier. It's very difficult though, for the average person, for even someone as big brained as myself and everyone else here, to understand these complicated economic issues, where the culture issues are just so easy to instantly, have an opinion about that. I'm not sure even focusing on the economics for DeSantis would have any impact whatsoever.
I mean, you may be right. You may be right. That may be the reality. But I guess my counter to that would be 2015, 2016, Bernie Sanders hops in the race against Hillary Clinton. Hillary's viewed as like, you're going to fucking, curb stomp your way here. And and then he ended up getting like 46% of the vote and gave her a real run for her money. And that was with like DNC fuckery behind the scenes. So I think that, I think the 2016 iteration of Bernie was honestly a much better candidate than the 2020 iteration of Bernie. And like, that's what his bread and butter was at the time. And I feel like when you give Americans a taste of that, like, no BS left economic populism, that they go for it. I mean, that's why, I know this isn't a very outdated argument to make, but like FDR won the presidency 4 times. And it's like, well, what was he? He was nothing but that. He was nothing but like, New Deal, social safety net, welcome the hatred of the money changers in Wall Street, tax them, redistribute it. And like, and I could be wrong. Maybe the distraction of the culture war is just so intuitively appealing to people that they can't think of anything other than that. But I don't really feel like they've been given, at least in recent times, a real option of a lefty or a Democrat who cares about these issues. And honestly, I think the overwhelming majority of the Democrats just simply don't care about those issues, which is why they don't talk about it, because they're also taking money from the same corporations and lobbyists as the Republicans are.
Well, I mean, I think with Bernie in 2015, it was, people, ever since 2008, people have lost so much faith in sort of the American system, and they were looking for that change. I think that's why people voted so much for Obama. Obama didn't really deliver on that change the way at least people perceived. And Bernie was sort of the continuation of like, okay, this, he will bring about the actual change, where Clinton was sort of like, oh, this is just, we're going back to business as usual. And I think that's part of why Trump beat her, is because Trump was basically like, I'm going to kick the table over. This is going to be the change that you guys want.
100%. 100%. I think that 2016 iteration of him he was able to posture as like, I'm the anti-status quo candidate. If you look at his closing ad from the 2016 race, it was good. Like, it was straight up good. And honestly, I think the 2020 version of Trump was nowhere near as potent. I remember we actually did this when I did the election special with Rogan. We played the 2020 Trump closing ad, and it was like, he was like dancing to weird music and shit. Like, he had evolved into the Fox News grandpa. Like, the grandpa who's just like drunk on Fox News, and they just regurgitate the talking points from Fox News and Sean Hannity. And that's appealing to a subset of the American population, but it's not a majority. And so that's why I think he had more of like a normie vibe to him in 2016, although it's hard to call Trump a normie in any sense of the word. But like, he had a more normie appeal to him in 2016 that sort of went away by 2020.
I have a bunch of questions. If well, I guess they're not really questions. They're stuff that I'm interested in.
What are you interested in?
Well, I mean, Kyle, you just followed us out of nowhere on Twitter. I guess that's an interesting story. Like, our fans will be happy to see, like, big celebrity YouTubers are reaching out to be on our show and stuff. So I guess that's a story.
What's the deal with it?
You called us right wingers. I was like, okay, well, that's wrong, but
I called you right wingers?
Yeah, you did. So one of our fans sent us a clip from your show, and you got the Adam and Sitch right. You said
no. You got it's the Sitch and first of all, Sitch and Adam. How dare you?
I reversed it. My bad.
But
everyone does.
First of all, as second billing, you did the right thing, Kyle. Okay, you did the right thing. Yeah. So I mean, that's interesting. Did you just do you watch the show at all? I mean, did somebody like?
I do. Find us?
I do. Oh, and I remember the thing that I was referring to. It's when you fell for that trolling tweet.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay.
Listen, I deleted it after like 5 minutes. Okay, I was on top.
Okay, but by the way, what I was saying was people on the right were falling for it, and then I added you guys in there. I don't mean you're on the right, because I genuinely don't think you are, and I think you got the thing that I like about you guys, and the reason why I followed you is because I like your stuff.
Thank you.
I think you're the first sort of like really honest, enlightened centrists.
Oh, okay.
Oh my God! Look, that's our first endorsement for enlightened centrism.
No, I mean, I know you might say a little tongue in cheek. I've heard you guys describe yourselves that way from time to time, but I actually kind of feel like you are, because most of the time when I think of centrists or when I hear centrism, there's 2 kinds of centrism in my mind. One of them is like, I'm in the center of Washington D.C. politics. People they call Joe Manchin a centrist, and I'm like, he's not centrist. He's just the most corrupt. when it comes to like actual politics, among normies, I do think you guys are kind of honestly centrist. And so anybody who knows me knows that my favorite thing to do, I don't need to watch shows where they regurgitate to me exactly what I believe in a way that's worse than I can articulate it. Right. I like watching stuff and listening to stuff that's like different and interesting, but not so different that I think you're insane.
Yeah.
And not so the same that it's boring. And you guys sort of fall into that sweet spot.
We're riding the line of insanity. I like that.
We try to bring an interesting perspective. Did you call yourself an anti-woke liberal? How do you define yourself? I think I heard you say that, and I was a little surprised.
Yes. Well, yeah. I mean, so I've been called that derisively many times, and it got to the point where I was like, all right, you know what? Fair enough. Fine. Because it's true. Because so I'm very vocally against what I would call the authoritarian left, which is lefties who just like die on that battlefield of the culture war and end up taking really stupid positions and end up advocating for really stupid things like banning Ben Shapiro or Ann Coulter from giving a speech at a college campus.
Right.
And in my mind, the true lefty view has always been the most pro free speech view because, historically, it's real lefties were first on the chopping block when it came to like suppression of speech. Try standing up against the Vietnam War back when that was happening. That was, you were castigated and pushed out of society, and it was viewed as an insane position. And of course, the old Red Scare, they would label people communists and then dismiss them, and they couldn't get jobs and stuff like that. And so, I think the true lefty position is to be pro free speech. And so I've often called myself a free speech absolutist on my show. I think a majority of my audience is probably with me, but yeah, there's like a vocal minority that doesn't agree with me. So I've had to kind of lean in and shake lefties out of their complacency or shake them out of their silliness and say, look, you shouldn't be first and foremost preoccupied with like censoring on social media and supporting that because you don't like Alex Jones or whoever. That's not the way to go. And I do view that as an authoritarian version of leftism when I'm more of what I would call libertarian leftist.
Well, what do we do to kind of shake this off? Because it seems like this sort of woke authoritarian left view has captured so much of the mainstream, but also has captured so much of independent media. I mean, it seems like the amount of YouTubers and Twitch streamers that are on the left but not in that category is like few and far between.
Yeah. I don't know what I can do other than continue to do what I'm doing, which is like, I try to be like fair and objective with the stories I cover and where I'm taking my shots. And I just keep it in the repertoire of like, if I see something I think is silly authoritarian leftism, then I'll cover it and I'll call it out. And I do think it's the people who are authoritarian lefties are very loud and aggressive. And so that might scare some people off from taking the more libertarian lefty position, but you just have to like lean into it. Don't be afraid to speak your mind on it. And, I've graduated to the position of like, I never read my social media anymore. And it's honestly, it's very liberating because it's like, I could just say whatever I think and then let the chips fall where they may.
Right.
And that's fine. And it's like, and if there are people if 99% of the replies are shitting on me or calling me a right winger or whatever, it's just like, hey man, scream into the ether. I don't care. Because I'm going to just state what I think. And if what I think kind of swims against the current a little bit in the political circles I'm generally affiliated with, so be it.
Seems like more and more people on the left are kind of taking that position. Like they've realized there is this contingent that just wants to purity spiral out of control. Like they're going to call you right wing for just disagreeing with them on some, moderate policy. So a lot of people are forced to confront the fact that people are just lying about your political designation.
Yeah. I mean, I think I just want to bring back like the nuanced worldview of like you and I don't agree on everything. We may agree on like 60% or 70% of stuff or whatever, but like, it's fine, and you see this all the time with Joe Rogan, for example, where like people on the right will take right-wing things Rogan says and they run with it at 100 miles an hour and like claim him as their own. And they're like, look, he agrees with us. Isn't that wonderful? Whereas people on the left will take right-wing things he says and say, this guy's terrible. He's with the other guys. And it's like, but he oftentimes says left-wing shit and you just don't highlight it or talk about it.
Yeah.
And so there's this like this urge to like push everybody away and make the circle smaller and have like, you know, this little powerless clique and subculture. And it's like, that's not the politics I'm interested in. I'm interested in like trying to build a bigger tent and get more people to agree with this worldview and you know, make it a big happy thing. But that's not how a lot of people view it, and it's a shame.
They smeared Rogan on the, you know, with the N-word thing. They made that little clip and tried to turn him into a right-winger. I love the supplement clip that, I don't know who put this together, but all the left-wing things, the total progressive things that Joe Rogan has said, and there's like a million of them. He's like 90%. You know, basically dyed in the wool liberal. He's for I think he's for UBI. It's like,
yes.
Geez.
So we were actually behind that.
Oh, nice. Really? Okay.
Yes, we were behind myself, Crystal Ball, and Sagar and Jetty. You know, we saw the N-word thing, and you know, by the way, that was originally, I think, clipped out by Alex Jones back when Alex was mad at Rogan or like Alex Jones. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy?
It
yeah,
is. And
so I'm trying to give the guy credit. I'm looking at my DMs for his name.
Alex Jones is one of his like biggest Joe Rogan is one of the biggest defenders of Alex Jones, and it's bizarre that Alex Jones stabbed him in the back like that.
So they actually had a fight relatively recently. When I say recently, I mean like maybe 2 years ago or something, where they kind of split up a little bit, and then Alex went to war against Joe Rogan on his show, but Joe like called him behind the scenes and like talked it out and calmed him down, and then but in that brief period, that like 1 week period where Alex Jones was going nuts on Rogan, he like clipped every bad thing he ever said out of context and ran it on his show and said like, this guy's a piece of shit basically. But they ended up working it out. The guy who made that, I wanted to give him credit. His name is Matt Orfala. He made that the back-to-back clip of the compilation of Rogan saying more like left-wing things, but it was myself, Crystal Ball, and Sagar and Jetty who reached out to him and were like, because he makes videos like this, and we're like, you know, can you make this? Because this is something that I just wanted to show people that it all matters, right? Like the N-word thing, everything was taken out of context. He wasn't saying the word, he was talking about the word and said it. So that piece of context is super important, number one. But number two, look, I would have no problem if people clipped out all of the genuine right-wing political positions Rogan said and spliced them together and put it out there. But you also should show the left-wing stuff. Like you should show the whole picture. And Joe Rogan isn't his worst moments and he's not his best moments. He's all of those things. But like, that's okay. And I think what annoys me is that people, it's very common these days. You just sort of like, you hear one thing you don't like and you put them in a box and shove them to the corner and say, this is useless. I don't like this person. And it's like, just grow up. Like how many in your personal life, nobody acts like this in their personal life. Like I have friends, you know, Republicans are in my family, and I have some of my best friends growing up are now like, you know, hardcore libertarian types. And it's like, whatever, we'll agree when we agree, we disagree when we disagree. But at the end of the day, it's not that serious. But people think it's way more serious than that. And they just want to make a smaller and smaller group of assholes who agree with them 100%, and that's it.
Well, the goal really is to take a political adversary out of the equation by making them untouchable. So the first encounter anybody has with the person, they have this preconceived notion of them as some, you know, right-wing ideologue. So everything they say or do is viewed through that lens. And if something is neutral, you can kind of force that lens on them. So I think a lot of people just end up doing this. The perfect example of this, and I want to talk about this because you had an interview lined up with Jordan Peterson. Like this is like Jordan Peterson 101. I don't know. I watch this guy and I'm like, where do these people get this stereotype that he's some Bible thumping Christian? Like I always thought the guy was an atheist until recently when he had the health scare, which obviously a health scare at his age does push people more towards being religious. So I understand what's going on there. But you had an interview lined up with him. I think he backed out, or I don't know if he backed out or there was just a scheduling conflict. But I'm curious, like, what was your audience's reaction to that? Because a lot of people just think Jordan Peterson's like some Nazi, basically.
Yeah, well, it was split. Some people in my audience said the ridiculous thing of like, why would you platform this guy? And I'm like, platform this guy? He's 4 times bigger than I am. What does that even mean? He's, he's platforming me, right? Like, what are you talking about? But then, a lot of people said, look, I'd love to see that conversation. And anybody who says they wouldn't is lying or they're dumb. And, that's the position that I end up on. I think it's kind of insane not to want to see that conversation. I'm fascinated by that dude for so many reasons. If anybody does a real deep dive on him and watches like a lot of his shit or reads his books, you will walk away saying this is a really complicated character. And there's so many areas of agreement that I have with him. Like, I think a lot of his self-help stuff and his psychology stuff is genuinely good. I think there are a bunch of people who I can name who I know in my life tangentially who it's like, you could use a little bit of that Jordan Peterson shit, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps, clean up your goddamn room, and like get your shit together. So like the self-help stuff, the psychology stuff, a lot of that I'm fascinated by. I learned stuff about it. I've watched his lectures on like Freud and shit, which I thought were really great. And he talks about Carl Jung all the time and explains things in a real clear, concise way. So I wanted to get into stuff like that to pick his brain on that. But then I also wanted to get into like, yeah, but him and I disagree a lot when it comes to politics and policy. And so I wanted to sort of flesh that out because I always felt like the nuance and the deep dive that he did with psychology stuff and with self-help stuff, it was just sort of, I found it lacking more in the political sphere where he seemed very like flippant and glib to me with certain things.
No, I'm disappointed that the conversation never came together because I felt like you might pull him. I hope so, because I feel like you might pull some political positions out of him. Like when you talk about political positions, I think, what political positions has Jordan Peterson actually taken? I don't know. I really don't. Aside from like the trans stuff, which he isn't really like a transphobe like they cast him as. He's always said he'll use whatever pronouns people find appropriate. I think he's not in favor of the non-binary stuff, which is another open question. But aside from that, like what political opinions does he have?
Yeah, so there's a number. It's kind of like his like overtly political takes are kind of sprinkled in throughout his interviews. So you have to consume a lot of the content in order to get it. But he did an interview with Dr. Oz where he kind of explained his politics and where he thinks he falls in the political spectrum. He oftentimes kind of hand waves away the idea of climate change and calls, things like climate alarmists full of shit. You know what I mean? And I mean, I had like a whole list of stuff. I did a lot of prep for that because I knew it was going to be a big thing. And like, I wanted to, dot all my I's and cross all my T's. So I'd have to go back and look, but yeah, his stuff on maybe like taxes and healthcare and, redistributive policies like social safety net. I don't think there's actually much agreement there between me and him. I think he views himself sort of as maybe a centrist or center right. And so I wanted to dive into that because it's always interesting to me when I think somebody's like super fascinating and kind of spot on in one area, but then in another area, it's like I kind of really diverge from them. And so I wanted to dive into that and I thought it'd be fascinating. Like I sort of pride myself on, if you look at my coverage, to go back to Rogan, he's actually a great example of it. And you guys, I think, are good at this too, which is why I find your show interesting. Like with Rogan, I try, whenever I talk about him on my show, whenever like I cover something he says, I actually think I've done a good job of like, here are some things Rogan has said where I disagree with him, and let me talk about that and in a fair way critique it and analyze it. But then here are areas where it's the opposite. So I'll put like, here's where I agree with him, here's where I disagree with him. Let me cover both and like put it out there, And I don't think a lot of people do that. And I feel like with Peterson, the only interactions that he's had with people who are on the left, he would think like they're dishonest, they're hacks, they're just trying to play got ya. And I wanted to have a conversation with him as somebody who's generally on the left. That's like an honest back and forth where there are disagreements, but nobody's throwing the baby out with the bathwater or, casting aspersions on his character or whatever the hell.
The thing that really bugs me, and I talked a bit about this with Christian while he was on too, is that a lot of people, what they want to do is they get off on like mischaracterizing the opposition's argument, even though they have a decent argument, but they feel like if that decent argument is allowed to compete with their argument, that's going to be bad for them. So we have to go out there and strawman the shit out of their argument. And if I'm out there and I'm just saying, I'm team truth, I care about what is the truth here. If I go out there and articulate their argument truthfully as it is, all of a sudden, just because I understand their argument, they think I agree with their argument. They think I endorse their argument. And I'm going, no, listen, that's not my argument. I'm just saying this is their argument, and we should, attack their actual argument, not this straw man version of it.
And it's so much more interesting when you engage with somebody and you actually address their arguments.
Yes, it is.
And it's also super rare. Like, very few people actually do that. And again, not to suck you guys off too hard, but that's why I like your guys' stuff, because I saw a bunch of your stuff and I thought they're handling it, like they're discussing an issue in a really nuanced way where they're honestly representing what they think the other viewpoint is, and then they're responding to that.
We're trying. Did you see? We did recently, and I don't know. Have you waded in on the abortion stuff? The abortion stuff is like so like toxic. But we reviewed an abortion one, and it was, I mean, obviously you got to put your own take out there. Go ahead. Have you reviewed it?
Have I talked about like the Roe v. Wade thing? Is that what you're asking? Yeah. No, of course I have. Yeah. So I've always described myself as, I agree with Roe versus Wade, but I would also describe myself as a moderate on the issue of abortion.
Right.
So my general view of it is that, like, it's the right of the woman, and the government shouldn't get involved unless and until you're talking about the nervous system being created in the fetus, and the fetus can feel pain. Because then I think it becomes a different moral and ethical question. Now, Roe versus Wade is interesting, and I would call it moderate because it did sort of parse the issue of abortion in a complicated way, where it said, okay, the first trimester, it's your right. The second trimester, the government's allowed to get involved and do some health regulations. And the third trimester, if the states decide, they can ban it in the third trimester. So like no late-term abortions.
Right.
And I just think that's the best way to go about it. I don't like this idea of, like, let's say you're 4 weeks into a pregnancy and you're in Mississippi and they decided post Roe v. Wade, well, we're just going to ban all abortions. I don't like that. I think that the government's too big in that scenario. What's your guys' take on abortion? I haven't seen your thing on abortion yet.
I disagree. I just disagree with life begins at conception. I think like the first 8 weeks, allowing abortion up to the first 8 weeks, I feel like is a good compromise. But I honestly, I haven't dug into the science, and a lot of people who make this their life's issue know a lot of the information that I don't necessarily know. I fundamentally disagree that in the first week or so of categorizing it as a baby, like it's obviously they want to say that it's a human life, it's a child, all this stuff. I agree with a lot of their arguments. Like if it's allowed to continue, it will be. But I bring it up mostly because as soon as that thing dropped, I was like, oh shit, we're gonna have to talk about abortion. And we pitch ourselves as a comedy show. Like this, how do you make abortion jokes? But we like after a while, I'm telling you, we're making abortion jokes. We're like, this is all baby killers versus rape apologists. And we're just dropping jokes like right and left. But it's such a weird topic. I think that show though, I mean, our audience, definitely a lot of people disagree with us, but I don't think they're like, we're going to be gone. They're like, you're wrong. And I'm never going to your
audience, man.
I'm never going to agree with you. Yeah, exactly. But they're not saying like, fuck off and die, basically. So,
yeah. Sitch, what do you think about abortion?
Oh God.
I know.
I just don't care that much about abortion, honestly. I guess because I'm a selfish man who doesn't have to deal with this issue. But I'm pro-choice. For what the cutoff date is, I couldn't tell. I would say like whenever the brain starts to form into higher thought functions, that's where I consider like human life begins.
Right. So age 21.
Really? Well, that was what I always say is I think abortion should go up to 21 years. Parents should, when your teenager's getting uppity with you, you can be like, listen, abortion's still on the table. Okay. But no, so I mean, whatever, I don't know when that date is. I was fine with Roe, whatever was it, 15, 20 weeks, whatever it was. If people want to, parse out exactly what that is, I'm fine. I don't really care. I think abortion's a net good for society. It's just the problem is it's just people are so animated on this topic that it's like one way or the other. You're either a baby killer or you're taking away women's rights to choose. And I get into so many conversations with people in both camps where they're just completely incapable of understanding that the other side of the equation, they just view it differently. They weigh the woman's right over her bodily autonomy as more important to whether there's a potential life inside her or not.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, to me, the more interesting question is the sort of the legal question and how that works, legally completely detached from morals. But obviously it's very difficult to have that conversation detached from a moral perspective.
Yeah. I mean, you have some people, the pro-life crowd, or many in the pro-life crowd, the ones that are probably more evangelical Christian, would say, like, literally,
assume,
like, the second the sperm meets the egg, that's a life. But then you also have, honestly, like the Bernie Sanders position, which is like, hey, even if it's a day before birth, like.
He said that?
I think, if I remember correctly,
that's insane.
Correct me. He didn't say, he did not say if it's a day before birth, but I remember them debating this in 2016. It's one of the rare issues where I agreed more with Hillary Clinton than I did with Bernie Sanders, where, she would say, look, I'm not really down with like late term abortion. And Bernie would be like, criticize her on that. So I mean, look, there is a left wing position where people say, like, we have a clean cutoff date here, guys. The clean cutoff date is like when the fetus becomes a baby and comes out into the world. So if it's 8 months, whatever. But what a lot of people don't know is the statistics on this. I remember I've covered this a bunch of times throughout the years because I thought it was fascinating that the Guttmacher Institute has looked into like what percentage of the abortions happen when. And so many of them, the overwhelming majority of them, happen before viability. So like 89% happen before 13 weeks. And then like 98% happen before like 22 weeks. And so it's only like 2%. Yeah, it's only like 2% that happen in that really late frame.
Right.
And so I feel like when people know that, I think the polls on this are super reasonable. And it depends how you ask the question, the way people respond. But it was either a Pew poll or a Gallup poll where 58% of the country basically said abortion should be legal with some restrictions. And then it was like only 19% said it should be illegal in all circumstances, and 32% said it should be legal in all circumstances. So I think like I'm right smack dab in the middle of the country on this one,
Yeah, I think I was saying when we reviewed that video, we reviewed Michael Knowles debated a college student on this. I don't know if you saw the video, but it's pretty insane because they're both very extreme positions. Michael Knowles is life begins at conception, and she is basically you can abort the baby right before it comes out. So I'm going, who am I supposed to root for in this debate? So,
yeah.
It was a little insane, but I was happy that we did talk about it and none of the bad fallout I suspected. I mean, obviously, I do read the comments and I find them endearing because there is a lot of hate comments, but I tell myself they're just joking. Like, this is sarcastic and I have no problem with them, so.
Yeah, I mean, you're a better man than me because I can't anymore. I can't
read
stuff anymore.
That stuff gets to you?
Well, I used to have a very, very thick skin, but then I feel like when the show hit a certain size, it's just not like it's unmanageable.
Right.
And so first of all, there's even like a practical question of like, almost like I feel like I want to be fair to everybody and read everybody's shit, but it's not even possible to read everybody's shit.
Right.
But then, yeah, I feel like my skin got thinner and thinner over the years where now it's like, I'll think about the negative comment because I maybe it's a flaw, but like I tend to take people at their word. And so if I see criticism, I think my default assumption is this is a good faith criticism, even if it's not at all a good faith criticism. Right. I'm like, damn, is there some truth in this?
I suffer just for my own too.
Yeah, just for my own like mental health. I know that might sound like kind of corny and shit, but like I'm just like I don't want to do it. It's just wasting time and energy where I could just keep doing what I do and just say the things I think are true and let the chips fall where they may.
It's annoying because like I know on Twitter you can tweet something and you'll get like 100 likes and then there'll be one reply that's like fuck you. And it's just like even though it's 1 out of 100, you fixate on that reply. You're like, oh my God, I think it just weighs on our minds differently.
That's
the
true.
negative. And I think, I mean, with me, I kind of the same thing. I don't know if it's thin skin. It's just, it's very different taking insults or criticisms from, people you don't like or people that you perceive as like your ideological opponents. It's very different than taking like hateful comments from people that are supposed to be on your side or quote your team. And I think that's a lot of what's, if you have a show where you're going to not just do one-sided issues where you're just going to build up an echo chamber, you're going to get a lot of negative comments from people that, that like you. And I think that hits you very differently than someone who doesn't like you.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's like, it's the curse of the heterodox thinker. that like if you're willing to break with whatever the conventional wisdom is on your team, then it's almost like you're asking for it. Like you're asking for people to come after you.
You are.
Yeah, but like you have to do it because you have to be true to yourself. You know what I mean? And
yeah, exactly.
That's the only way you could actually have a direction and a point for your content is if you consistently just say what you think, no matter where it ends up.
Yeah.
And
have you read?
Well, I just want to say, like,
oh, go ahead.
I know it's kind of like it's probably very annoying for people to listen to like content creators whine about being popular, but that's what I get. But it's interesting because I know that a lot of times, like if I get like a negative comment on something, even if it's worded very like aggressively, like if I talk to the person and I don't like just snap back really aggressively, like very often times they don't realize that the tone that they're talking to you is very aggressive. And I think it's because like they're used to just kind of talking to like the void of the internet or just talking in this sort of like very aggressive style, and it's fine. And it's like, okay, but they don't really necessarily expect you to respond back to them as if like you're a person you're acting. So.
That's totally true. And I've noticed this too, that people like to your face, they'll sound totally different. Like Vaush had some very like vituperative criticisms of me and Crystal.
Vituperative.
Super like, you know, like these guys are irredeemable, fuck them type shit. And then when we talk,
really,
he's much more, you know, he's willing to listen and bounce off of it.
Well, I think that's a little different though. I think there's a general, like obviously there's a general sense where if you talk to someone in person or just I guess on audio like we're doing, most people that are not psychopaths are going to be more polite and kind and courteous as opposed to text. I think with Vaush it's a little bit more sneaky. I think it's more like, you know, I got to put on a pretty face to sort of appeal to this person's audience to get their audience on my side.
Right. So you're saying there's a motive to do that.
Yes, right. Because he went on Tim Pool and he did the same kind of thing when he was talking to Charlie Kirk, and that's just kind of his MO, in my humble opinion.
Vaush is like a regular villain on the channel. I don't know if you know that.
Well, I see you guys shooting your guns in every direction, and I respect that.
Well, I don't know that Vaush is operating in good faith, to be honest with you. So it's an open question. Maybe he is. Maybe I always reserve humility in these cases. Maybe I'm wrong. I could be wrong, but I mean, I don't necessarily know.
Him and I have had some pretty big disagreements, but I have talked to him a bunch on air and stuff. And
yeah, but you're on his side.
I mean, it depends. Yeah, it depends on the issue. I mean, he's certainly more woke than me. You know what I mean? Like on that issue.
Way more woke.
Yeah. So there are disagreements, but again, I'm just trying, and maybe it's a problem that I try to take everything at face value and engage in good faith, but
no, I
can't operate any other way. You know what I mean?
You have to. Yeah. I don't want to belittle you doing that. I do think there is some value to operating in good faith, but as soon as I smell blood in the water and I sense that the person is operating in bad faith, I mean, I jump in with both feet. Like there's this guy Jangles that we debated, and I'm just convinced he doesn't care about anything. He doesn't care about the truth. He's just out there trying to build his brand, which I understand. I respect that. I'm playing the game. I get how it works. So, but you mentioned, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, I'm sorry. I was going to say, I hate the partisan, like super partisan commentators. They annoy the shit out of me.
Yeah,
the people
me too.
who say the thing that they think they're supposed to say. God, I hate that so much. It just drives me crazy. It's like, you don't even know what you really think on this. You're just like saying the thing you think you're supposed to say. And I cannot respect that at all.
Do you mind what are you friends with David Pakman? I'm kidding.
I know. I don't want to
get you in trouble.
I'm acquaintances with David Pakman.
Let's get Kyle in as much trouble as possible.
I don't want to get him in trouble though. You mentioned loyalty a couple times. Have you read Jonathan Haidt at all, or do you know Moral Foundation?
I have not. I know who he is, but I've never read any of his books.
Okay, yeah, you should check that book out. It's amazing. But you talked about loyalty in the case of Joe Rogan. Like you said, listen, I've been on his show. He's always treated me right. I'm loyal. I have a sense of loyalty, which I share that. I have a very strong sense of loyalty. But also the when to go against your tribe thing is against the loyalty foundation. So it's interesting. I think conservatives sometimes overemphasize loyalty.
So yes and no. I think that's a nuanced thing. I feel a sense of personal loyalty to him, but also, if you go check my channel, I criticized him a number of times. In fact, I just did a segment this week where I criticized a take of his when it came to, what was it, paid leave or something like that? Or, yeah, like taking a sick day or like a mental health day. He had a very, like, glib, like, just, like, fuck that, man up.
Go to work.
Shit. Yeah, it was... And so I didn't agree with him. So I covered that and I talked about it, and I agreed with, it was David Dole's criticism of Rogan. I thought David Dole was fair and mostly correct in what he said. And so, but like the sense of personal loyalty just means like, I'll never engage in like the bandwagoning and the pretending that he's worse than he is. And like, just sort of cutting somebody off and treating them like they're the other and they're the enemy. Like, it's conceivable that one of the times I end up doing Rogan's podcast, we disagree 70 or 80% of the podcast. That's perfectly conceivable. But at the end of when we're done, I'll still give him a hug and say, hey, man, it was great seeing you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Did your episode ever get re-upped? Didn't they take yours down?
One of them was taken down, and I don't think it was ever put back up. Now, I thought wrongly that the reason they pulled it down was... that I
because you were saying the N-word right and left on the you're dropping in.
Of course, I mean, no. I had really criticized Saudi Arabia aggressively in it, and Spotify had just expanded into the Saudi market at the same time. So I was like, this is bullshit. This is why they pulled it down. But then no, come to find out, Joe actually did say Nigga when quoting Kanye West.
Wow. So there was an N-bomb in it. Hilarious.
There was, yeah. It was a Rogan N-bomb, but it was soft A, which I will maintain is a total difference from hard ER.
Yes, yeah. So do you have a take on cancel culture? Because we're kind of with the Rogan thing, it's very clear, and I often argue with people about this because some people. I like to take a very clear stance on cancel culture. I think most cancel culture is driven by taking people out of context, which is basically lying. I feel like they're being dishonest and deceitful when they do that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. That's pretty much my take as well. I feel like I will say there's one little caveat, though, of I do oftentimes feel like sometimes maybe somebody will say something that's like factually wrong, and then they'll get dogpiled, and then they'll be like, oh, you're just canceling me. And it's like, no, I'm just sort of trying to correct the thing you said, which I think is inaccurate. So you got to be careful because sometimes they'll throw that wet blanket of cancel culture over anything to try to deflect any even legitimate criticism. But as a general rule, I do think you're right that oftentimes it's just, piling on or taking people out of context and trying to label somebody a bad person when that's not really the correct response, and it really gets under my skin when there are actual consequences for it. Like somebody could get fired from their job or somebody could get banned from social media. Yeah. And that I'm against in almost every case because it's like, taking somebody's livelihood away because maybe they said something that was fucked up. It's like, well, that's a more fucked up thing to take away their livelihood. How do you not see, like, you got to see it in context and in perspective. And that's worse. It's worse to take away somebody's livelihood or ban them off social media.
See, Sitch hates it when I say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. Because the distinction that you're making is perfect for my conceptualization because a lot of times the left wants to say it's not cancel culture, it's accountability culture.
I hate that. I hate that.
Well, they point to these examples which basically kind of are accountability cultures. It's like someone fucked up and wasn't doing their job or was sexually assaulting someone at work. And they want the person immediately. Look at this. Look at this. I told you he was going to get pissed. Like there are legitimate, like if someone is like not doing their job,
right? Like
you got to let them go, right? I mean that's their job to do. That's not cancel culture, but people will come out and say, "Oh, that's cancel culture."
The problem with the way you're defining it, Adam, is that first of all, just a dog piling on someone, just insulting them, saying they're wrong. That's not cancel culture. Cancel culture is when someone says something that you don't like, or you perceive you don't like it because it's taken out of context, and you try to get that person's livelihood affected by getting them fired or trying to get them kicked off of social media or something. It's that second step. But it doesn't. But this is where I quibble with you. It doesn't have to be based on lies. You could just not like something someone says, or you just perceive it different. Like you could just say, like, oh, if you don't stand behind non-binary pronouns, then you're a transphobe. Okay,
right. But that's a lie.
I don't know.
It is a lie. It's a flat out lie.
That's their opinion of how they're defining transphobe.
Right.
It's not a lie.
99% of the people who say transphobe, the person is not really a transphobe.
Yeah, but that's not from the person
but
calling
from their perspective. He's saying their opinion is that they're a transphobe. That's what he's saying.
See, this is why this is why we have the concept. And tell me what you think of this, Kyle. Systemic dishonesty.
Systemic dishonesty.
Right, because they believe that they're telling the truth. But we as Team Truth understand they're effectively not telling the truth, right?
Yeah.
Like if somebody comes out and says, like they constantly say, Jordan Peterson, he did this thing with Bill C-16, which was a total lie or whatever. And none of that stuff is really true.
I mean, I think...
They do believe it.
That's what I was going to say. I sort of agree with Sitch that the fact that they believe it means that their intentions in some sense are sincere, but they just have a warped worldview. Does that make sense?
Yes. No, I completely agree.
I think part of the reason I have a problem with the way you're categorizing this, Adam, is because I don't think we should most people think that they're the righteous man.
Yeah, everybody does. Yeah.
They think they're on the side of good here. So if you just say, oh, cancel culture is when you lie about someone, well, then that plants the seed that like, oh, if I'm not lying about someone, it's okay for me to get them fired. Right, it's like, no. We live in a, pluralistic, liberalism society where we need to accept that there are people that have different opinions than us. So even if it's not based on a lie, I'm not going to get that person canceled.
But what if it's like that legitimately what they did is just insanely over the line?
Well, but that's a different situation. If someone sexually assaults someone, obviously they should be fired from that job that they sexually assaulted someone from.
Do you guys agree that people play loose with cancel? Like I agree with the way you guys defined it as like if you're getting somebody fired or you're like trying to get them banned off social media or they are banned off social media like that. Since there's an actual like thing that crossed the line and was too punitive, I would say that is actual cancel culture. But there's plenty of examples of like just dogpiling on its own is not necessarily cancel culture, right? But but then I would say it also probably depends on who's right. So like if the people who are doing the dogpiling are wrong, then maybe that's kind of like cancel culture. But if the people doing the dogpiling are right, that's not. I don't know.
Yeah, that's accountability culture.
It depends what the intention of the quote unquote dogpile is. If it's just a bunch of people saying you're wrong, regardless of whether they're right or wrong, I say it's not cancel culture. If the intention of the dogpile is to drive someone out or off of social media, then it is cancel culture.
I think that's right. I think you're drawing the line in a good place.
Do you have you done a video on CRT? Have you studied CRT or looked into that stuff?
No, I've never really looked into it. I know that the general idea, and correct me if I'm wrong, is trying to like analyze U.S. politics and the legal system through the framework of race, basically. So
that's like the nice way of saying it. That's like the most positive.
Give me the non-nice way of saying it.
So the non-nice way is basically CRT came about by certain scholars saying, how come the civil rights movement failed and didn't bring about the racial equality or racial equity, really, that we were hoping for? And the answer they landed on is, well, it's the system of liberalism and individual rights. And that's the real problem in our society. And that's why they're so against the concept of colorblindness, not just as like, I know that colorblindness gets a bad rap because in the 80s, Republicans were using it to try to fight affirmative action.
It shouldn't get a bad rap.
Right. Right, exactly. And I understand people sort of saying that you need non-colorblind policies, but CRT is against like colorblind as a goal. They don't think it's something that should be sought after. They don't think it's something that's possible. And they're more, and this is where it gets crazy and people don't believe me when I say this. But if you read like just the key CRT works, they are in favor of a more black nationalist, black separatist approach to race relations. They don't really believe in like the melting pot theory. And that's where I have a huge problem with CRT.
Well, that was like, Malcolm X and the Nation of Islam,
right?
Young Malcolm X, their idea was like, and he had this phrase he would say, he would say, it's not segregation, it's separation. He would say segregation is like enforced on an inferior by a superior, and separation is when you mutually decide to part ways. And yeah, I mean, I don't. That's kind of like a horseshoe theory type thing, right? Where it's like, you kind of end up agreeing with the Bull Connors of the world. You end up agreeing with the actual segregationists. You're just saying, let's do a more woke version of segregation. So yeah, I don't. That's not right. That's not good.
Exactly. And because basically, and this is part of the problem, I guess, with the way that we've learned about this, is that, when we talk about the civil rights movement, I think, and this was my educational experience too, is just that, you have Martin Luther King, and he's kind of espousing these liberal principles of colorblindness, and it was just him against the racist, and he won. And that's civil rights movement. But in reality, it was MLK was doing that, and he did embody kind of the liberal principles of reform within the system and colorblindness. But there was a far more radical leftist group of people, like young Malcolm X, like the Black Panthers, like SNCC, like a lot of these individuals who didn't believe in colorblindness. They didn't believe in assimilation. They didn't believe in getting along. They did believe in separation. And the weird thing here is that CRT is the continuation of that kind of Black separatist movement, and people just don't realize it. So you have this weird situation where, because the Republicans have kind of latched onto CRT as this culture war wedge issue, reflexively, Democrats and a lot of people on the left have just come to run to defend it. And it's like, you guys realize you're defending an explicitly anti-liberal policy. And they have no clue what they're defending.
Yeah, identitarianism and sectarianism never, ever ends well. Ever.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So that's not good if they go down. But, in a more interesting question, though, because I agree with you on CRT based on your explanation here, a more interesting question is, well, should that be taught about in school anyway? Not as like, here's the framework you guys should abide by, but like, here's a theory put forth by people who believe X, Y, and Z. Because like, we all agree you should teach about MLK, but you also should teach about Malcolm X, even though Malcolm X in many ways had very divergent views from MLK, at least young Malcolm X did. And that's always been an interesting one for me, and I always struggle with that one because, like, and you see this more broadly with the education debate too. Like, the Trump had that, I forgot what he called his, like, the curriculum that he rolled out, like this pro-American version of history.
Yeah, it was really silly. America first.
Yeah, basically like, let's only teach the good things about America and like downplay the bad things. And you have the lefty version of that, which is like what was it called? The
only teach about the bad things.
Yeah, the 1619 project of like, let's only talk about race and how that was this country's original sin, and don't talk about any of the massive strides, whatever, the civil rights movement leading to actual advancements. Don't talk about whatever, the New Deal, the Marshall Plan, yada yada. So you have those two versions, but then so I think those are both silly, but then the question is, how should you actually teach? And I would just maintain teach the good things and the bad things, but you also get what you just said right there. It's like, should you teach about CRT? Not as like, hey, this is a framework we should all abide by, but as like, here's what these, academics are saying. What do you think?
Right. Well, regarding the civil rights movement, I think 100% it should be taught that there was these multiple factions on the left that didn't agree with each other. Because I think if that was known widespread, we wouldn't be in the situation we're in right now. So I'm definitely on board with that. In terms of CRT, like, I don't have a problem with it being taught in like college. I don't have a problem with people taking a class on, I don't like communism, but obviously people should be able to take a class where the teacher explains what communism is in a neutral way, without advocating or, saying it sucks, and I'm not against CRT being taught in that way. The problem is that with CRT, it's sort of being snuck into places, and it's not like being open and honest what exactly it is. And I think that's the real issue. Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fair. I admittedly don't know enough about like just how much CRT is taught and where it's taught, but certainly if it's taught as like, this is the framework that, people should believe in and advocate for, that would be problematic.
I
was saying, like, in younger schools, they're not going to teach you CRT, but they'll teach like ideas about it, like, oh, we live in a white supremacist society, or we need to abolish whiteness, or our country is founded, inherent in the system of our country is like white systemic racism that can't be gotten rid of through liberal reforming. And that's sort of how this stuff kind of sneaks its way into the education. But
teaching, like how we teach is tough though, because sometimes if we feel like value judgments are unavoidable, you know what I mean? Like when covering World War II and Nazi Germany, I think everybody agrees if you have a value judgment that Hitler is bad, that's actually more objective. Like to be neutral is actually to be biased in that sense. Like the more objective thing to do is say this guy was really bad. But then it gets tough because like what about the fringe cases or the edge cases where it's like, well, some people think reasonably that you should teach X, Y, or Z as a value judgment, and some people reasonably say no, don't do the value judgment, to try to be more abstract about it and more theoretical and more neutral. Well, so it's tough to like craft a curriculum that's really does the job that education should be doing.
No, I agree. And I think when it comes to public education, I mean, it's public education, which means everyone should have to sort of have, like, it should be, public education should be whatever, like, the most normie take on anything is. So it's like, you know, it's not controversial to say Nazi is bad, like, anywhere in America. So it's like, okay, so it's not like you have to be neutral on all of these things. But it's just I don't think public education should be teaching political, like these contentious political issues, because the point of public education is supposed to be education for everyone. And I think that has to encompass everyone's belief system in that to some extent.
I agree, but what do we do? Because I like the way you phrase that, but what do we do when the normie take is wrong? You know what I mean? Like, what do we do when, I'm trying to think of an example of it. Like, what do we do when the normie take in the South in 1955 is like, well, of course segregation is reasonable. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's kind of tough to parse these out.
Take.
Yeah, but there's no, I understand what you're saying, but there is no solution to that. Because if the mainstream culture has like a really wrong take on something like pro-segregation, you can't create a system that's going to fix that independently of the mainstream culture. Because the mainstream culture is going to control whatever the system is.
So you're saying politics is downstream of culture? That's,
Of course it is.
Right.
The mainstream take right now is that there's nothing wrong with cancel culture. Most people seem to be fully on board with cancel culture as long as they're canceling.
I don't think that is the normie
take.
I don't think that. I think the normie take is not pro cancel culture.
Let's Google it. Let's look at a poll on that. I'll take a look. Poll cancel culture.
Yeah,
I would be curious to see that.
Oh, look at 69% say cancel culture unfairly punishes people for past actions.
Boom.
Okay.
Damn. And that's a Hill Harris X poll, so that's legit.
There you go. See? Normies win again.
I like to trust my gut.
Proud of my normiedom.
I don't know if this poll.
Well, we get a wrong sense of this because, you know, the loudest voices on Twitter and the loudest voices
is still ungodly. I can't believe 30%.
Well, listen, you can get 30% to say anything on a poll. Okay,
that's true. Definitely 20. You could definitely get 20% of people to say anything on a poll.
The issue is I don't think that the mainstream media is representative of the normie voice. Maybe it never was, but it definitely doesn't seem to be right now.
Yeah. So I feel like we're dominating. Do you have anything you want to talk about?
Let's argue about something. There's been way too much agreement in this conversation.
We could argue if you guys want.
I don't argue. What would we really argue about? I'm not sure. Well, you make a claim that we've brought up on the show before that I'm not sure is correct. Well, we can't let you go because we have kind of talked about your healthcare videos, and we make a big distinction. Like, one of the reasons we think Bernie Sanders lost was because his healthcare policy was Medicare for all is basically socialized medicine. And the public option is much different than Medicare for all. And I swear in a video, you conflated the two. And it made me think that you thought Medicare for all and the public option were basically the same thing.
I definitely know they're not the same thing.
So European style healthcare is the public option. So when you say European style healthcare, you're not talking about Medicare for all.
There's different countries. I mean, there's different European countries.
Yeah, there's different systems. In
Europe has different countries, Sitch? I had no idea.
I know, but I mean,
thanks for
some European countries do have like completely government-run medicine.
Do they?
Some don't.
Yes.
Yeah, like England does.
What is
the UK? The UK does. Yeah. That's correct.
So
the UK is totally government.
So England is Medicare for all. They don't have any private insurance plans in England?
It's further than Medicare for all, because Medicare for all, I thought Bernie's plan was just that Medicare pays for everything. The government doesn't actually run the medical institutions like they do in the UK.
Right. So the way it works in the UK is that you have public funding of public institutions. So it's totally nationalized. Like the doctors are literally employed by the government. It's as governmenty as you could get.
They're government employees, right?
Right. Whereas
every libertarian's head's exploding.
Whereas France, for example, is public funding of private institutions. So it's still tax money funding it, but it's going towards private doctors.
Do you buy into things like creative destruction and the innovation cycle and that kind of stuff?
Don't know exactly what that is.
Well, there's this idea, and I get this from the book Why Nations Fail. We talk about that book all the time. It's a great book if you haven't read it. But in that book, James A. Robinson and Darren Acemoglu, total left-wing economists, they're basically saying that if political actors get too much power, often to sustain their power, they will stifle innovation. And he's saying that really different nations are competing on innovation. So you have to get this thing where society steps back and allows creative destruction, where, you know, some new technology is going to displace another technology. Like, I'm sure you've heard, you know, Andrew Yang talking about, you know, automation is going to come along, self-driving cars are going to destroy the economy. We have to get some sort of UBI going. That is basically the innovation cycle. The innovation cycle ultimately puts people out of work. Now, I bring it up because in the healthcare situation, you do need innovation in healthcare. And if you have some nations that have completely taken an innovation cycle off the table because there's no profit motive to innovate, then that nation is probably, you know, siphoning off of our innovation cycle. Like England can probably do that because America is completely capitalistic and has an innovation cycle going. But I think if every single nation did that, I think it would kill the innovation cycle.
So I half agree and half disagree. Mm-hmm. The area where I agree is just the notion that, look, some aspect of competition is going to improve certain industries. I think that's unavoidable. If you look at the cars that came out of the Soviet Union, they were abysmal.
Yes, perfect example.
If you look at the cars coming out of the US and places that have more free markets, undeniably they're better. There's no way around that. Where I would disagree is that I don't think that that's the case for every single industry. Right. And specifically when it comes to healthcare, I definitely don't agree, because just to give one fact that I find really interesting, U.S. tax dollars funded every new pharmaceutical drug in the last decade. So in other words, you have tax money going to universities where they do the research and development, they create new drugs, and then you have pharmaceutical companies swoop in and buy up the rights to those drugs and then sell them back at a profit. So I just think in some instances, it's more a question of funding for the innovation, where as long as you're getting the funding, it doesn't really matter where the funding comes from. But like I said, it's not, the world's a complex place. It's not like that in every industry. There are plenty of industries where it's just provable that, you know, competition yields better results.
Just because it's publicly funded by tax dollars doesn't separate it from the profit motive, though, because ultimately, you know, they want even the universities are incentivized to develop these new drugs because they want to get they want in on the patent or whatever to develop it. So they are involved in the revenue stream of the drug.
Yeah. I'm not
So
sure exactly how that works. I would say I would have said that it is the case that you're sort of removing the element of competition because you're just having the best and brightest minds funded by the government try to research and develop new drugs.
Right.
And so I just don't think there's as much of an element of competition there. Maybe they're in some way competing with other universities for the grants or something.
You're removing competition, but you're not removing the profit incentive.
The profit motive, yeah, exactly.
If they're going to
the
get
profit,
bought out, basically.
I don't know if the universities get a cut, but my understanding was that pharma just comes in and buys up the rights and, you know,
well, then that's where they get their cut.
Sells it back to us.
They want to get bought out by a private pharmaceutical.
Yeah, that's where they get the cut. Yeah, it's the same. It's kind of the same model, I think, as independent filmmaking. Like, you want the studio to ultimately buy your movie and put it in theaters around the world so it can be a big success.
So do you guys think the only way you get advancements technologically or otherwise is because of competition?
Creative destruction. I think it's people, and this is where I constantly disagree with the socialists because they have no idea. Like I think of our modern society as like a human resources problem. It's like, how do we get the people who have the big ideas, the space where they feel safe enough to invest in these big ideas? And, obviously some of that, people have different tolerances for risk. And if there's a system set up where, you have someone with great ideas, but they have an extremely low tolerance for risk, you're going to lose all of those ideas. So I firmly believe that a lot of left-wing policies will stifle innovation. And like I said, in the healthcare situation, I think England can do it because America is the one coming up with all the drugs. Same with China. Like I would make the same argument about China. China is basically stealing all of our intellectual property, stealing all of our products. All of our products are developed and the ideas come out of America because there's the profit motive. But the profit motive doesn't exist in China in the same way. So they just, they try to get us to move our factory or our industry over there, and then they just steal the ideas. They're basically siphoning off of our creative destruction.
So would you say, if you think, competition yields the best results, then would you say you're also a big antitrust guy, that we should like bust up the biggest?
Yeah, monopolies.
Right.
Yeah.
That's like Matt Stoller is all over that. Yeah.
This is where it came from. And they even outline this in the book, the Why Nations Fail book. They give several examples where, somebody came up with some innovation and they brought it to the monarch or the king or the baron or whoever was in charge at the time. And they're like, are you kidding me? This will put everyone out of work and they'll want to revolt. I'll have a revolt on my hands, and they completely stifle the innovation. So
yeah, I guess our only disagreement I think you make a good argument. I think our only disagreement would be, are there limits to that? And I would argue that when you have the resources to meet people's basics, there's almost something immoral and unethical about not meeting those basics by having a social safety net that takes certain things off the table in a civilized society. So that's why I've always been very fond of the social democracies, because I think they strike a really intelligent balance between like X, Y, and Z are socialized, healthcare, right, education, what have you. But then also we're going to harness the power of market forces in other respects. So it's like a hybrid system where you try to take the best parts of various systems and put them together.
I totally agree. And when you're talking about something like UBI, I don't know if you're in favor of UBI. I was in favor of UBI for the longest time, but when you argue with people about UBI, they always push back with inflation. And I don't have a good answer for that, whether or not it will cause inflation.
This is something that I've actually been really interested in recently, not as it pertains to UBI in particular, but just the idea of inflation more generally. And Matt Stoller, again, to plug him, he wrote a great piece on this where my layman's assumption about inflation was, well, it's obvious we just did a lot of big spending because of COVID. So like you're pumping more money to the system, that's by definition going to lead to the inflation. But I had a conversation with Jeff Stein on this and another number, and he's like the one good Washington Post like economics reporter guy. He's actually really intelligent and not biased, whatever. Anyway, so I talked to a couple people who are like experts on this, and they impressed upon me that my layman's assumption was just incorrect. And what's actually leading to inflation, there's a number of things that are leading to inflation, but one of the things is the supply chain. So the fact that the supply chain got so messed up during COVID, that led to a bunch of the inflation. Another thing, to bring up what we talked about earlier, is actually monopolies. Monopolies was another thing leading to it. And then Matt Stoller wrote about how 60% of inflation is just corporations using the hysteria and the mania around inflation to jack up prices to increase profits. Mm-hmm. So in other words, big spending can lead to inflation, but the situation we have right now, that's not really the case. And on the issue of UBI, I mean, look, it's possible to just to do a UBI and not necessarily do it with like new printed money. Like you could do it by taxing the wealthy or taxing corporations. Like there are ways you could craft a UBI where it might not lead to inflation. Right. And I like to think of it, we already have Social Security. So like old people get a UBI check. So why not just have like Social Security for all? Like Bernie coined the whole Medicare for all thing. Like why not give Medicare to everybody? Why not give Social Security to everybody? And that also makes it. There's been a number of like pilot studies on UBI, and they've all come back with phenomenally positive results.
Yeah.
So I think it's a great idea.
This is where really the rubber meets the road, because I don't know. Like I said, I think of society as a human resources problem. I do think that if you set up a society where people have UBI and they have universal health care, that kind of stuff, you're taking a lot of personal risk out of their daily lives, so they can pursue big ideas, big projects. So I feel like you could get a complete giant innovation spike out of it, or everyone could just turn to their lazy side and just stay home and smoke weed and play video games. I don't know the answer. I really don't know the answer to that question.
We were both we both were in favor of Yang at first.
Yes,
a lot in the early days, and we were both pretty big on UBI. But I feel like when we both started to get into MMT, we sort of switched away from UBI to a jobs guarantee program, which to me makes more sense than just having a UBI system, because it kind of alleviates the problem that you just talked about. I mean,
Adam, to your point, it's I see where you're coming from with that. Like, what will happen if you give people enough to maintain? And it really comes down to a question about human nature. Like, do you think humans are fundamentally always in search and always going to try new things, or do you think human beings are like fundamentally lazy and like will sort of just say, I got what I need and that's it? And honestly, I think the answer is both. Like, I think there might be some small percentage of people that are like, you know what, I'm good. But I do think probably the overwhelming majority of people would still kind of go about living their lives as they were before, just like now with a little bit extra material support to be able to get by.
See, this is where I lose people, because their moral intuitions come in and they think, oh, Adam, this is totally unfair what you're doing. But I agree with everything you're saying. It's both, right? Like if I had UBI, I'd still work 7 days a week. I'm a workaholic. Same. I love to, yeah, exactly. So, but we're going to be the people.
You guys are not good temperatures for everyone, though.
No, but that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying.
True. Right.
Can we run an economy if there's only like 20% of people like you and me who are they're going to work no matter what?
I don't think you can.
But it's also about the balance, Adam. It's like, well, how much are you giving people? If you give people $5,000 a month, then a lot of people are going to check out of the system. But if you're giving people $1,000 a month or whatever, that might be enough where last month they weren't able to pay the fucking light bill, and then this month they can. You know what I mean? So it's all about striking that balance.
Instinctively, I think if you give people $5,000 a month, there's going to be like a lot of billboards going up like, my ex-wife is a piece of shit. They're going to find innovative ways to like spend that money. So I don't know. I sent you an article from Scott Santon.
Scott Santons. Yeah, he was a Yang
guy. Do you know
guy.
him? Okay.
I don't know him, no, but I know he was a Yang guy.
Well, he wrote this article on UBI and MMT. This is such a great article if you haven't read it. So I sent it to you on Twitter, but yeah, it's an open question. It's interesting to have conversations about. I got into MMT because I kept saying I was in favor of UBI, but I knew nothing about economics, so I had to start reading about. Well, I knew the basics of economics. I won't say I knew nothing.
Have you guys, as MMTers, ever debated like Austrian
all
economics
the time?
Type?
That's like they hate our guts. Are you kidding?
They almost certainly do. Yeah, because it's the polar opposite philosophy. Yeah.
Yes. Do you know anything about MMT?
Yeah, I know some about MMT. I know that Stephanie Kelton is like the biggest advocate of MMT.
Yes.
Yeah. I know that she was an advisor to Bernie Sanders' campaign.
Right.
I know that it's somewhat similar to Keynesianism. That's
post-Keynesianism is what they call themselves. But there's similarities. AOC has an economics degree. I didn't know that, but I guess
I didn't either.
She's friends with AOC or Stephanie Kelton, because
I didn't know that.
AOC and Bernie
much
Sanders,
to Adam's chagrin. So.
AOC and Bernie Sanders are friends as well. So yeah, I saw some congressional hearing And AOC actually asked some intelligent questions on economics, and I was like, fascinating. Like everybody always thinks of her as a dingbat because all the clips that get shared are her as a dingbat. So
well, she brings that upon herself. So
yeah, I sort of agree. She does
She
bring it
is-
upon herself.
yeah.
I wish she'd talk about economics more. In fact, I wish she only talked about economics, if you ask me.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think
As opposed to hiding
AOC
in closets.
I think AOC is a racist. I'm comfortable saying that. But I mean, she's hot enough that I'm willing to forgive it. I'm willing
What
to
are
look
the-
the other way.
What are the comments that lead you to that conclusion?
Everything is just, she totally buys into like the white male patriarchy is running this ship. Like I feel like that's her.
So
her
let me
go-to.
give you. I could give you a story about that.
Mm-hmm.
I know
Give us a
that
story.
during the Bernie Sanders campaign, when the campaign decided, and Bernie didn't make this decision, somebody who ran like the social media or whatever made the decision, or maybe the campaign manager made the decision. When Rogan sort of like tepidly endorsed Bernie during
Right.
one of his podcasts, the Bernie Sanders team.
That was a tepid endorsement. He came out. Come on, he was fully in
well,
favor of Bernie.
Rogan originally supported Tulsi. And then
Oh,
Tulsi
okay.
didn't really
Okay.
get much steam. And then he he was like, yeah, I'll vote for Bernie Sanders. And so they clipped that out and ran it.
Okay.
And, I heard from people inside the campaign that she was the one behind the scenes who was actually furious about the fact that they had tweeted the Rogan endorsement and were like promoting the Rogan endorsement.
AOC was furious about this?
AOC was mad because there's a certain subset of leftists who think,
Joe
he's-
Rogan is a right winger.
A Nazi.
he's untouchable because, he made some trans joke in 1998 or whatever the fuck,
Yeah.
And so, yeah, that
Interesting.
stuff is really annoying to me. It
Right.
really
I
frustrates
had no
me.
idea about that.
I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know how much longer you can stick around. I want to ask you, have you heard of Selectorate Theory or read the Dictator's Handbook?
I have not, no.
Have you watched CGP Gray's video Rules for Rulers? It's
I have not, no.
Yeah. That's the one. This is like the really big idea. And I totally recommend it if you're a political commentator, because it really, I mean, it's like the theory of everything for politics, for building coalitions and stuff. Like there was a big hubbub. I think Force the Vote came up. Were you involved in the Force the Vote thing when they were trying to get, what was that? Explain it to us.
So it was mostly Jimmy Dore came up with it. Jimmy Dore was like the chief advocate of it.
Right.
I came out in support of it because I didn't see him getting much backup, and I think the idea made sense.
Okay.
And so I was just, I was a secondary voice or an ancillary voice, and I was just providing some of the arguments as to why I think this makes sense and why this is the direction we should go in.
Right.
I literally totally forgot what the vote was even being forced about.
I thought it was healthcare.
It was Medicare for all. So it was, in the midst of the pandemic. And, when you have a pandemic, like a once in a generation pandemic, it's like, you think maybe we should center healthcare and provide like aggressive arguments as to why we should have universal healthcare at a time like right now. And you just saw total apathy among the progressive caucus, among people who were supposed to be allies and advocates of Medicare for all. And that was really, that was a moment that was really a shame because it led to a lot of nihilism on the left about what's even possible. Because you didn't move the needle at all when you're going 100 miles an hour trying to advocate for this thing and begging your representatives like, hey, could you please fucking represent us here? And there was a public citizen report that came out, I don't know, maybe a year into the pandemic or something like that, where they crunched the numbers and found that about 330,000 deaths could have been avoided if we had a universal healthcare system in this country. Because we don't have universal healthcare and because and so many people are uninsured that by the time they show up to the hospital, it's already too late and then they end up dying. Whereas if we had a universal healthcare system, a lot of those people would have survived because they probably would have been able to seek care earlier. No. So it was just a total failure of progressives and it turned a lot of lefties nihilistic. And that's a nihilism that to this day I kind of have to argue with because, if you think nothing's possible and you don't do anything to try to change anything, then yeah, it's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy and nothing's going to be possible,
I think my issue with Force the Vote was that, Biden ran specifically not on Medicare for all. He ran on a public option.
True.
So he's sort of running against, Bernie Sanders and Medicare for all. So it'd be
True.
sort of like a weird slap in the face to Biden and the people that elected him, I guess, over Bernie. And so it would have made more sense to me if they're going to try to push for a public option, which they still haven't done. And I think has been a huge failing of the Biden administration, then I'd be in favor of that. But pushing for Medicare for all doesn't really make sense to me at all.
So there's an old saying: if you shoot for the stars, you might reach the moon. And like, so you're supposed to.
You want the big ask, and then walk
go
back.
into the negotiation repping the strongest position, and then throughout the legislative process, it's probably going to be watered down in 1,000 different ways, and then you might end up on public option. So, and like, I don't really care what Biden wants. Like, I think this is the answer. So you try to. That's the whole idea. Just try to force them to do the right thing. We know they're not going to do it on their own. So it's like, well, let's try to force them to do it and just see what ends up happening. But there were no real allies in Congress on that.
It's not. I mean, to me, it's politics is the art of the possible, and they were never going to support Medicare for all anyway. And I understand what you're saying about like the big ask, which is there's definitely a lot of validity to that. But on the other hand, it is a problem because since we have this sort of like polarized left-right media cycle. If the opening bid is Medicare for all, even if that gets watered down to a public option, the right-wing media is going to run it as Medicare for all, socialized medicine, regardless, once that opening bid occurs. So I don't know if that would make sense from a strategy level.
So the attempt of force the vote, it wasn't even supposed to be like a partisan thing of like, hey, other lefties, let's get on board and do this. It was supposed to be a rallying cry to people of all different political stripes and affiliations. There's a pandemic. We don't have universal health care. People are dying. For the love of God, for once, do the thing that's right for the country. And so now ultimately it may have ended up being more of just like a niche lefty thing, but that certainly wasn't the original intent. And like there were historical analogs to this that I thought were really interesting that I learned about at the time, which is another reason why I supported it. Like women's suffrage, for example, came up like 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 times where they had a vote on it and it lost before they ended up eventually getting it. And so the idea was like, even if we lose, which you almost expect to lose, given all the odds that are against you and how bought off the politicians are by the insurance companies, et cetera, even if you lose, you might spark something that then leads to the next fight and then the next fight. So I thought there were really solid arguments to do it. I thought, all the arguments against it were just, defeatism and nihilism and, why even bother to try since it's really hard. But it's like, yeah, I'm sure if you spoke to somebody who lived in Mississippi in 1955 and said, hey, you think segregation is going to be here forever? They'd be like, of course it's going to fucking be here forever. We have segregation. We've always had segregation.
Right.
So it was trying to like change the scope of what people view as possible. And it just ultimately ended up failing for a number of reasons. There was no support inside Congress. But then also, I mean, keep it real, Jimmy rubs a lot of people the wrong way. He's very quick to like, if you don't agree with him 100% right away, he just sort of in the next breath will just be like, you're a sellout and you're hopeless and fuck you.
We've gone
it's like, well, that's definitely not how you build bridges. That's
totally
definitely not how you do it.
Yeah, you don't build coalitions that way. Jimmy's lost his mind on fucking Ukraine, and it drives me insane.
Yeah, there's no nuance in that commentary at all when it comes to Ukraine. Yeah, what I can't understand why he doesn't get it and why some percentage of the left just doesn't understand this is like, okay, that same perception, Jimmy, that you have about America. Right. In this instance, Russia is America.
Yeah.
Like they're doing the shit that like we did in Iraq, like they're doing it in Ukraine.
Right. Good. Yeah. Perfect example. Yeah.
Right. But there's, for whatever reason, it's like they can't wrap their minds around it. Is it really that hard to believe that big, powerful states do fucked up things?
Yeah.
Like it's not unique to America. Like what are we, uniquely fucking evil? Are we uniquely evil in Americans as how we act and how we think? No. Every empire throughout history does fucked up things. Every big, powerful state throughout history does fucked up things. This is an example of a big, powerful state doing a fucked up thing, and it's obvious, and he can't get his fucking mind around it.
Jimmy's like, we got to get in there. Russia's got to get in there and get that WMD. You don't understand.
There was a week where people were I don't know if Jimmy argued this, but there was a week where a number of those people were unironically arguing that.
I know.
They have fucking weapon labs. It's like, how do you not see the parallels with Iraq? Oh my God.
I know. Oh, it's so sad.
Well, unfortunately, there seems to be like a contingent of people on the left whose the primary lens is America bad.
Yeah.
And so it's just sort of like a reaction to like, oh, if America or the mainstream's in favor of supporting Ukraine, then that obviously I'm going to just be reactionary to that and say, well, they're hiding something or they're wrong.
In the past, I would have hard disagreed with you. Yeah. Today, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, we were
a super eye-opening experience for me when I saw this.
We were blindsided by it because a lot of people in our audience, a lot of people on the right did the exact same thing. They did.
I saw your debate with Sargon.
Yeah.
I saw your debate with Sargon. I was like, what the fuck is even going on? What is even going on? He kept saying, well, from the Russian perspective, but let's just talk about objectively. What the fucking Russian perspective? Right. Let's just talk about objectivity.
That's hilarious. So that makes sense. You're still friends with Sargon, right? I mean, you still talk to him.
No, I haven't talked to him in years.
Really?
Years and years. Yeah, we maybe did 3 or maybe 4 streams together going back to like 2016-ish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I haven't talked to him in years. I think we drifted apart when I was one of the co-founders of Justice Democrats, and I was like sincerely trying to change the Democratic Party from within, make it more populist left, economically left, and like not corrupt. And he was very skeptical of it from the beginning. And so from then on, we kind of just naturally parted ways. I never took any shots at him, and he never took any shots at me.
Yeah,
but we just
Sargon's. Carl, I guess he's going by Carl now. Carl Benjamin, he's always helped us on the show. He's always been a friend to me. I've always seen him to be a stand-up guy. I've never seen him do any of the things he's like been accused of, except for the rape joke on Twitter, which is, I mean, that's a solid joke as far as I'm concerned. So
this is how much of a boomer I am. I don't even know the joke you're talking about. I just know he's been banned from Twitter maybe like 1,000 times.
That's
but I didn't
a joke.
know why.
He said, I wouldn't even rape you joke about some Parliament MP. I mean, it's something that got him a lot of it. This is the thing. And I wonder often if people do this incendiary stuff so they get attention and they blow up, and then they spend their entire career apologizing for the incendiary thing that they did.
Sargon and Cenk Uygur have a lot in common as we...
Oh, no, don't say that.
Wait. No. You'll agree with me once I finish the thought.
Okay.
We are creators. We are YouTubers who try to make it in official politics.
Right.
And didn't end well for Sargon and didn't end well for Cenk Uygur.
Right.
Yeah. Are you moving towards the political realm? I think you're in with Sagar and Crystal Ball now. They're definitely like on mainstream or teetering on the mainstream.
No, they're definitely not mainstream. So Crystal and I are together, and
together. I mean, I don't see her. Is she sitting behind you?
No, she's my girlfriend.
Really?
Nice. Yeah.
Have you announced this on your show? Are we making news?
Yes, yeah. This is known. This is known.
Damn you! Why didn't you save it for us?
And yeah, there's I do a different show with her called Crystal Kyle and Friends, which is more of a podcast. It's not really YouTube. It's just a podcast that we do together. And yeah, in terms of our politics, what they're trying to do is like a honest populist left, populist right show.
Right.
Like that's their framework. That's their mindset. And they've taken off massively in popularity since they went independent. They used to be with The Hill. They used to have a show called Rising on the Hill, which is a corporation, a fucking soulless corporation that took advantage of them.
Right.
Then they left The Hill, started their own thing called Breaking Points. They've been wildly successful. And look, I'm on the left, right? I would call myself a social democrat or like a libertarian leftist. But their version of politics is much more in alignment with me than like I used to be with TYT, for example. I think TYT is too partisan, too woke. Yeah. I think they're good people there. Like I know them from behind the scenes and they're very sweet, very nice. I would never say a negative thing about them and how they were interpersonally. But yeah, my politics is a lot more like Breaking Points politics than it is like TYT politics. And so that's why, I'm sort of in league with them in a sense.
Yeah, I liked them on Rising, and they got me into Rising. I still watch Rising because Rising does try to be kind of nonpartisan. And I have watched their show a few times. And I mean, I've watched your show with Crystal Ball too, and it's good. So
yeah, you got to check out Breaking Points because I think her and Sagar do a really good job. Sagar, he used to be more of he would probably say he was more of like I don't know if he was ever a standard right winger, but the thing that really severed him from the right and made him even more of an independent thinker was when everybody who he knew and who he liked on the right, even personally, they went insane with the, stop the steal, the fucking rigged election type shit. And he was like, I can't affiliate with this shit at all. So he stopped being like, the mouthpiece of the right on their show and just started being Sagar. And ever since he did that, he's he's really coming to his own, and he's become a much more critical thinker, nuanced thinker. And I think they do a great show. I mean, certainly my politics are much more like Crystal's than they are like Sagar's, but I think they do a great show together, and it's great chemistry, and they have a great audience.
Hopefully this space is opening up more, because this is our space, so it helps us if people are more interested in it.
Dude, just honesty. Like, that's the space needs to be just, what do you actually think about the fucking issue, and talk about it. That's it.
Yeah.
And it can't be, like the thing, like the unearned sense of like superiority or purity that I see among some commentators. That's the shit I can't like. I'm just a YouTuber. You're just a YouTuber. Like, fucking relax. Jesus Christ. And it's everywhere, man.
He's talking about David Pakman, guys. That's what that's what he means when he says that.
David, I'm not, man. I'm not David.
Just to be clear here, he didn't throw David Pakman under the bus secretly. Right? That's a joke, okay? This is a comedy show, guys. Yeah, we've had some fun with David Pakman in the recent days. I mean, I would like David Pakman to come back to reality. I would like that. I would like him to go down the Saga or Crystal Ball path, but I think he is kind of drifting down the Cenk Uygur path.
Yeah, he used to, I don't know if he does these segments anymore, but when he does like sort of like bigger topic segments, not the daily news stuff, he does seem very thoughtful to me when he talks about, like, I'm trying to think, he did one like social democracy versus socialism, or he did some.
That was like forever ago, though.
Yeah, exactly. That was a long time ago. I don't know if he does the big topic things anymore, but I always find those things very he did some race and IQ thing that I thought was like very thoughtful. But yeah, on the day-to-day politics stuff, he does strike me as, very, very partisan. He's got a very I'm not saying this as a shot at him, but I can almost predict his take before he has it. Right. Which, by the way, glass fucking house here, because people who watch me every day know exactly what the fuck I'm going to say before I say it.
Yeah,
well,
go ahead.
I think we watched recently. He had a conversation with Michael Knowles, who we're not really fans of, but about the Supreme Court justice, answering the question or not answering the question that she couldn't define what it meant, what a woman was, and they just couldn't have a conversation. Like, he starts the conversation right off the bat by calling Michael Knowles like a bad faith actor from like literally like the first sentence out of his mouth. And I'm like, listen, you might think that, but like, at least try to engage in what the person's saying. And it really feels like he's been captured by his audience, which is unfortunate, because I felt like he used to be a lot more moderate in his takes.
Yeah, so I watched both. I don't know if you saw the new one. Did you see the new one? Pakman.
I didn't see the new one yet. No.
Yeah, so they do a new one on Roe versus Wade, which I thought was better and more interesting. But yeah, I saw that first one, and yeah, it struck me as like.
I saw the second one. Are you
evasive?
Knowles.
You saw the Roe v. Wade one?
I think and Knowles like kicked him off. He was like wanting to stick around. Is that the one you're talking about?
I don't know if he kicked him off or just the segment was ending, and
Pakman
was surprised at the end, like, "Oh, that's it.
Yeah.
We didn't even start yet."
He was on for a super short period of time, and he was like out of there. And
I actually covered that one. I didn't cover the first one, but I saw the first one.
I feel like Knowles was getting back at him a little bit. Knowles was like, "Yeah, it's over, buddy."
Yeah,
there was a little bit of that dynamic.
I have some experience with Michael Knowles because I did a Politicon panel years ago, and he was on it. And it's interesting because I think the Politicon panel was titled like, "How the hell are we going to get along?" or something to that effect. And so it was supposed to be, here are a bunch of lefties, here are a bunch of righties, and talk about how like we can get along from here. Now, Charlie Kirk, who I have many criticisms of, but he actually went on the panel with the point of the panel in mind. Right. And so he tried to engage, and him and I actually found common ground. Hey, I hate Saudi Arabia. You hate Saudi Arabia? Awesome. Hey, I hate the drug war. You hate the drug war? Awesome. So you got like a libertarian streak or whatever. Cool. Michael Knowles refused to do that, and he struck me as super partisan. He was just trying to do like the whole Ben Shapiro shtick of like, I'm Mr. Right Wing guy. And I remember one moment in particular where he said something like, I'm staunchly pro-life, and I responded with, "Oh, it's awesome to hear that you're against the death penalty. I am too." And then I'm for the death penalty. Like that. And I was like, Michael, come on, man. If you're going to walk into the traps that quickly, this is going to be a quick panel.
Yeah. Michael's definitely an ideologue, I think.
Yeah. Totally.
So I don't know your schedule. I have one thing, I guess, it's weird. I don't want to throw you off the show, but at the same time, we have a bunch of super chats to read. We're probably going to stream for another like 4 hours or so. So
no, we can wrap this up. I got a whole show I got to prep for tomorrow.
Okay. So I'll ask you one more question. Go ahead, Sitch.
Well, no, I have two questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Before you go. Okay.
The
first is, do you think you could defeat a horse-sized duck in a fight?
A horse-sized duck in a fight?
Yes.
I don't think so. A horse is pretty big.
You think you would get defeated by the horse-sized duck?
This is brutal honesty here, Sitch.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
I mean,
Sitch is lying to himself when he thinks he can beat a horse.
I could take that horse-sized duck easy. I don't know what you're talking about.
Ducks have teeth.
If you get the legs, if you break a leg or two, like you might end up winning. Yeah, like
they got those thin little legs.
Right. Yeah. But if you can't break the leg, then that motherfucker could like chomp you or some shit.
No, come on, my God, you guys.
That bill's like as big as a human being.
No, okay.
Do you have any
the
real
second question
questions?
Is are owls birds?
I would have said yeah. Is that wrong?
No, you're right.
No, you're definitely right. Yeah.
I was like, is this a trick question? Of course, an owl's a bird.
No, we had a guest recently who was trying to argue with us that owls were not birds. So, just making sure.
Well, that's super fucking bizarre.
It is very fucking bizarre.
Well, my question will spawn like a 2-hour debate, so I'm going to save my
Adam's
question.
Is a real question.
I'm going to save my question for next time. How about that?
We could do it. Let's just do it real quick.
Okay. You cite a report a lot that it kind of triggers me.
Which is it?
There's this report that says the elites get what they want and the plebs don't get what they want. Do you know this report?
The Princeton study.
Okay, yes.
From like 2015, 2014, something like that?
Right. So I read that study, and it appears to me that study's completely in line with selectorate theory, because the study also talks about how, activist coalitions also get what they want, and they get what they want at the same levels as elites. And this is this is why I think the force the vote thing is so interesting. And, it's been so long, I can't remember what my position was on it, but I think Sitch and I did talk about it. And whenever we talk, we do talk in terms of like selectorate theory. Like, is this a good strategy? Because ultimately where the rubber meets the road is it's like poker. I understand what you're saying. You're saying like we should bluff. We don't have the votes. We got a shitty hand, but we'll just bluff. But I don't think bluffing works in politics. I think you got to have the cards. So I really think politics is a lot about building the coalition, getting that hand and playing it at the right time.
So part of the problem, though, Adam, is that nobody who was against it was proposing any alternative theory. It was just like, definitely not this. It's like, okay, but then what? Like, what's your plan? Walk me through it. Because I try to be a logical guy. I try to, I'm not a complex thinker or anything, but I'm like, if you explain to me, not now, but here's the steps that we're going to get to where we'll eventually get it, I'm all ears. And part of the argument was like, you try to bring like civil rights movement type pressure and bring it down on Congress and bring it down on the White House. And, if the thing actually took off and it became as big as people wanted it to become, get like 500,000 bodies in the streets in Washington, D.C., where our main ask is Medicare for all. And so you take that pressure and you move politicians with that pressure. We knew going in, there was a Medicare for all caucus. They had like 100 and some odd votes, but even of those people, like half of them were fucking lying. They don't actually support it. They're just signing onto it. So like the idea was these people are so useless and they're so corrupt and they're so bought and they so don't agree with us that we have no other option but to just try to force them to do the right thing. And so even though it was a long shot, it was the only shot. If you tell me, hey, Kyle, you could have a 3% chance of winning or you could have a 0% chance, I'll be like, okay, fine, I'll take the fucking 3% chance, even though it's almost certainly not going to work. So that would be my argument to defend that. To the Princeton study, my source for that, and I remember covering it at the time, and I just pulled it up, April 17th, 2014, it's a BBC article. Now, maybe this is hyperbolic and maybe you're right and I'd have to read the entire study, but I was just going off this article, headline, study, U.S. is an oligarchy, not a democracy. And then the article's not that long.
That sounds like a neutral headline.
No, it's definitely not neutral, but I did think it was objective. Now, you're telling me this study's not exactly as they portray it, then you're right. I'd have to look through that and see how much activists affected.
I do think elites have a lot of power, but it's odd because I think they have a lot of power for a dumb reason. I think they perceive having a big war chest is going to help them win an election, when really they need to win over the voters. The voters is what matters. And that's why activists in the study have as big a sway in getting policy passed as the elites do, because elites, whatever politician is, ultimately they know, if I pass this policy, my voters are either going to be with me, or they're going to vote me out of office. Like, that's the whole idea behind selectorate theory.
So my guess would be, and we'd have to see if this is true, is that the activists that do end up getting their way are activists on social issues specifically.
Right. That deliver the voters. Exactly.
Whereas when it comes to economic issues, I think big money almost always wins. I mean, if you look at the U.S., there has been many advancements on social issues, whether it's civil rights, whether it's gay rights, or whatever, where there's been a regression since the New Deal is when it comes to the social safety net and economic issues.
Right.
So I think that the influence of big money is first and foremost, and most importantly, when it comes to economics. Why do you have a situation where, I don't know the number off the top of my head, 70-80% of the country supports raising the minimum wage, and we haven't had a minimum wage increase since George W. Bush.
Right.
And it's because, the corporations pay the politicians do their bidding, and corporations end up being the only entities in the country that don't really want to raise the minimum wage, along with a small subset of libertarian economics type thinkers.
Well, I think it's more than that they're getting paid off. It's just that people don't come out to vote for those issues. So why are they going to expend political capital and risk it to push these things?
If the voters
that's where I'm more optimistic, and maybe I'm naive, but I am of the belief that if somebody were to present a straightforward populist left economic agenda and make that their main focus, as long as they're also charismatic, of course, like every politician should be, then I think that people would take that option if given that option. But again, to your point, Sitch, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the culture war brainworms are so numerous that we just can't escape the culture war vortex.
If like a left-wing politician came out with what you're suggesting, if they came out against the culture war, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
But
so
that's the part of the issue, is that, I don't know, is it a chicken and the egg? Is it the culture war? Is it the economics? I think it's more the culture war.
See, I would tweak it slightly. I do think that if they came out hard against the culture war, that might actually mess up their voter base. So to build that, cross the ideological coalition, you would need almost somebody who's kind of agnostic on the social issues,
maybe
on the culture war.
That would be safer. That would definitely be a safer.
Yeah, and so if all you're talking about is anti-corruption stuff, anti-establishment stuff, minimum wage stuff, union stuff, healthcare stuff, education, I think that's the winning formula. But nobody's come close to that since Bernie 2016 did a pretty damn good job, which is why he did such a phenomenal run from a total obscurity to almost beating Hillary Clinton.
I think it was the bird that landed on the podium. I really think that's what captured America's heart. So yeah.
Well, guys, this was fun, man. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
You're welcome to come on anytime. Just send me a message. You're welcome to. We stream Sunday and Tuesday, so
awesome. Every week I travel back and forth from Washington D.C. to do my show with Crystal and to spend time there.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I do a lot of traveling, so it's genuinely difficult for me to find time. But I'm happy that I was able to find time today because this was a good conversation.
Yeah. Take care, man. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.
Now we sit and watch you try to find
the exit button. Yeah.
All right.
Our first, is that our first ever enlightened centrist endorsement? That might have been.
That's awesome.
I'm impressed. Listen, I don't care what anyone says. No one could ever speak ill of Kyle Kulinski now for any reason.
Because, exactly.
He said that we're based enlightened centrist. That's how easily I've been bought off.
That's hilarious. Come on, Sitch, you got to do a little bit better than that.
No, I'm that easy.
Don't be totally soy.
No.
How come you didn't ask him the POV question?
I should have.
You wanted to.
Listen, we have to save something for next time.
Yeah.
Okay, you got to reel them in, and then you add. I'm not going to ask Christian the POV question until the third conversation. I'll ask Kyle the POV question on conversation number 2.
Hi, you just listened to a clip from the Sitch and Adams show. If you like what you heard, you can listen to our live show right here on this channel on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. And if you want, you can super chat us. We read $20 and up super chats on the show and then do a follow-up stream on the following Tuesday where we read the rest of the unread super chats and interact with fans of the show. Subscribe to this channel right here to listen to the live show or to listen to more of our awesome clips.